I don't know about you, but I always like it when I'm going to spend a day in some kind of training or teaching, just to kind of know, like, where are we going? Like, what's the day hold? And so I want to start this morning just sharing with you a little bit of my story, because it so much informs now everything I do in the ministry I have called Replenish. So we'll spend a little time on that. And then this morning, especially maybe right after lunch, we'll spend a little bit of time focused on the health of a leader. And so the mantra of my ministry is we want to help people live and lead from a healthy soul. And I think the order of that is important, because I think for so many years as a leader, I so focused on just leadership that I often neglected some of the other important areas of my life, my own soul, my marriage, kids. And I've just got this deep conviction now that I want to help leaders get really clear about how they're supposed to live. And then from out of that healthy place, build great churches. And so I, want to talk about that at the first part of the day. Then the last part of the day, we're going to sort of shift and talk more about high-performing teams and how we can help our teams thrive and be more, not just godly and spiritual, but actually effective and getting stuff done in Jesus' name. And then I want to close the day with a brand new talk that is all about kind of, and again, I'm going to talk as the old guy in the room who's 66, and what it looks like to transition to being a person of deep spiritual influence in the lives of others. And so we'll kind of close the day with that. So anyway, let me back up. Connie and I have just celebrated 46 years of marriage, and she is my best friend and partner in ministry, and I can't imagine doing life apart from her. And we're very blessed. When we moved to Colorado 13 years ago, we had no idea this was going to happen, but both of our kids followed us. And 2 grown kids, both married. I have a son and a daughter, and the best thing about my kids is they produce grandkids. And so we have 4 beautiful granddaughters, 2 that are 12, 2 that are 10. And it really is true what Proverbs says, that grandkids are God's reward for you not killing your kids. It's not actually in Proverbs, but I think it should be, honestly. And but I came to faith when I was 12 years old, and I remember not long after I'd come to faith, I was in junior high, and we went on our first student retreat when I was in junior high as a 13-year-old. And I got my first glimpse of what it might look like to be in ministry. And I remember it was late on a Friday night, and our youth pastor was kind of assigning us to pray with each other to kind of cap off that first night at the retreat. And so I got sent out with 2 seniors in high school, which I admired them so much as a 7th grader. And so I admired them so much, Gary and Alba, and they had brought a friend with them who was not a Christian. And so we were supposed to go out and all pray together. And so I remember we were sitting around a pine tree in the tree well around the bottom of the pine tree. And I watched those 2 high school kids lead their friend to Jesus. And I just remember being so captivated by that. And even though I had no idea what it would look like to have a life in ministry, I just remember thinking, I'd love to give my life helping other people discover what it means to follow Jesus. And that was sort of my first glimpse of what might be ministry. And then as I got a little bit older, by the time I turned 17, much longer story, but I had this kind of clear sense of I can't imagine doing anything else with my life, and that God was calling me to ministry. I remember going forward to my church and telling my pastor, and he had then turned and we told the congregation that the best that I understood the will of God, I was being called to full-time ministry. And I, again, didn't understand all that meant at that time. But as I look back now, I would kind of describe my love for Jesus in those early days of just starting out in ministry as pure and simple and wholehearted and passionate. And again, I didn't fully understand everything I was signing up for, but man, now almost 50 years later, I still feel just as called as ever in my life. And I took my very first church job at the age of 17. I was literally the same age as some of the students in our student ministry the summer that I was their youth pastor. And if I could go back to the senior pastor, I would say two things to him today. I'd say, number one, thank you for giving a young, inexperienced, unseasoned kid a chance to lead in the church. And number two, I would say, what the heck were you thinking? Like, I didn't know anything, and you turned me loose on your students. But I'm grateful. And then I went off to Bible college and seminary. And actually, while I was in seminary, I took my first lead pastor job at the age of 23. And again, I feel like I should go back and apologize to all of those people for inflicting myself on them, because I had a lot of zeal and ambition, but not much knowledge or wisdom, and made a lot of mistakes, but they were gracious and they loved us. And I was a senior pastor for 20 years. And I think, like a lot of young leaders and senior pastors, I loved God. I wanted to build the church. I had gifts of leadership. I was full of ambition. And then in 1999, again, a much longer story, but I had the unique privilege of getting called to be on staff at Saddleback Church. I'd grown up as a younger leader listening to Rick Warren and watching how God had used him to build Saddleback Church, and to have a church that could still be Bible-centered, but also relevant to the generation and speak the language of the culture, was like, oh, that's what I want. And I remember when I went to the first conference with Rick Warren, and I had a yellow legal pad. We didn't have iPads back then, or computers. And so I remember just taking a slew of notes. And on the way home, I took that iPad out, and I remember making a list of what ideas I thought I could implement without splitting our church or getting fired. That was sort of the criteria for, what was going to make the cut. And I went back and began to try to do that. And so I'd followed Rick, and now in 1999, here I am, I'm being invited. First, I became the pastor of discipleship, and the church was making a transition really to small groups during those days. And it wasn't long after that, then I got the responsibility of leading our small groups area. And then they asked me to lead these campaigns, which I didn't even know what those were at the time, but they were considered a spiritual growth initiative, and it kind of fell to my area. So Rick said, hey, I want you to lead those. And after I'd been there a little season, I was invited to be on the teaching team there. And then in 2002, Rick wrote and published the book Purpose Driven Life, which was a complete game changer for him, for our entire church. We, saddled that up with a campaign called 40 Days of Purpose. And Rick had built a lot of goodwill with churches all over the world at that point. And his sermons, his books, Purpose-Driven Church, and it was amazing. So he said, I want to see if there are some churches that would want to do the campaign in the pilot phase of the campaign, and they would do it 1 week behind us. So we would do it this week, and then we would send them all the sermon material, the small group material, and they'd be 1 week behind us. And to our surprise, 1,500 churches decided to do the campaign with us. And it was just a crazy making time. And I remember when I joined the staff, this is an important point. I was on one side wildly ecstatic to get the opportunity to be in such an amazing place. And on the other side, it was horribly insecure for me, because I remember just the imposter syndrome feeling. Yeah. Of like, I'm so far in over my head, and if they discover that I'm not what they thought I was when they hired me, I am so screwed. And but I joined the team and started leading in 40 Days of Purpose. The church grew so much, and the influence of Purpose Driven grew so much. My boss became the director of Purpose Driven Ministries, and I was asked to become the executive pastor over all the ministry side of the church, and to continue to lead those campaigns. And I remember, I'm a bit of a planner, but we always used to kiddingly say, Rick never met an idea he didn't like. And he chased after every new opportunity or new idea. And I remember we were like 6 weeks out from starting our campaign, and Rick came in and he said, hey, I'm glad you guys are all here. I was meeting with the campaign team. He said, in this morning in my quiet time, God convicted me that we're not showing enough faith in this campaign. And I want us to have exponential faith. And here's how we're going to define exponential. Whatever your goals are, add a 0. So we had a goal of starting 300 new small groups, and he said, all right, your goal is 3,000 new small groups. So 6 weeks out, it forced us to completely throw everything out the door and go, we have to start looking at everybody who attends our church as a potential small group leader. So he said, how do we remove the barriers? And we didn't start 3,000 small groups, but we did start 2,180 something small groups during that campaign. And that's what it was like to live there, because Rick then, as Purpose-Driven Life came out, he became a global celebrity, and there was this tsunami of opportunity. And while it was amazing, I look back on that season, and I would tell you it was both the most intoxicating and toxic season of my life all at the same time. Like, it was so amazing to be on the rocket ride of ministry influence, but in many ways it ended up being soul-crushing and almost destroyed me. And so after 7 years of being there, I just began to go, I don't know that I can keep doing this. And now I can look back and tell you what I really longed for was not a different way to do ministry, it was a different way to do life. And so Rick and I began to have some conversations over about 6 months, 4 pretty lengthy conversations, one that included our wives. And I remember the second conversation he and I were going to have. I was driving into his neighborhood and had gone through kind of the gate where the community is and was driving up the hill. And I just remember this overwhelming feeling like, Lance, who do you think you are? Like, talking to this guy and talking to him about the problems that are in the church and in the staff, and like he's one of the most well-known Christian leaders in the world. Like, who do you think you are? But at the same time, within probably 30 seconds, just this overwhelming peace from the Lord's Spirit of, but you know what's right, and you have to have these conversations. And I remember it was a really tough journey of surrender for me, because in many ways, it was my dream job. And now I'm thinking about leaving. I didn't know what I would do or what my job might look like. And so I remember like a little voice in my head going, you know, when you leave here, no one's going to care what you have to say anymore. Because what gives you credibility is not who you are, it's the name of the church you serve. And so there was this real journey of surrender of like, the Lord just reminded me, Lance, at the end of the day, I'm going to hold you accountable for your faithfulness to the call I've given you, not to the name of the church you serve. And that's what's most important. And so I was willing to sort of lay down what had been this dream job and ministry role for me. And we did make the decision to walk away. And I didn't have another job or another church to go to. And I was in my mid-40s. And felt very lost and confused. And it was my wife who one day said, I think as you pray about what's next, you ought to be open that God might have something different than just being a senior pastor. Because I figured that's what I do, because that's what I'd known for all those years. And so I was on a plane ride to Singapore. I'd been scheduled to speak at a conference, and it was the middle of the night. Everybody was asleep on the plane. And I just remember crying out and going, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this season of my life. And you'd like to think by the time you're in your mid-40s, all that be really clear. And I've had very few mystical experiences where God just really clearly met me. But in that moment, when I asked, what do you want me to do in this season? What I heard from the Lord in my spirit was, I want you to help leaders be healthy, holy, and humble. And I didn't know what that would look like practically. I didn't know anybody who had a job like that. But that was the early seeds of what then became Replenish, and then coming alongside leaders and trying to be a friend to pastors. And really, Replenish flows out of my own story, because I would describe in those early days, and even when I wrote the first book I wrote called Replenish, it really was my journey of discovering what it would be like to bring my own soul back to life. After years of being a workaholic, of drivenness, of neglecting my marriage, of not paying attention to my own soul, having no outside interests or hobbies outside of doing ministry, could I find a way forward that would, make me be able to bring my own soul back to life? And I feel like that's been the journey I've been on for the last 18 years. And I mean, I would not dare to sit here and pretend like I've got all this figured out. I'm still very much in the journey of it. But now, almost 20 years in, I would tell you I love the fruit that is coming. And it's not all of a sudden, it's not quick, but the way of life and the way of doing ministry, I love it. Like I can honestly say I love doing what I do today at 66 more than ever. I don't want to do it as fast as I've done it in the past. But I want to do it, with my whole heart and life. And so Ruth Haley Barton, and she's got a couple of great books. If you've never read her book, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership, it's a great read. But she says, it is possible to gain the world of ministry success and lose your own soul in the midst of it all. And I feel like I could write my name to that statement, that would certainly be true of me. And so anyway, hopefully that helps you know a little bit of my journey, and then informs kind of now what I spend my time doing, trying to come alongside other leaders and their teams and not just have great kingdom impact, but actually live life and do life in a way that is beautiful and life-giving.